Welcome back to another SuperCoach video with me, JD. You're joining me for another team update. The scratch matches from last week have all concluded and the team has been updated accordingly. And I must say, I am not a huge fan of where my team sits compared to prior ones. Unfortunately, with the rookie situation, as well as some of the other must-haves popping up and Primo's going down, I just really don't like how it looks at the moment. But I mean, it is what it is, right? You can only work with what you've been given. So this is my best guess at my round one team based on the rookie performances we saw on the weekend, as well as, I guess, like what fan and official channels are kind of talking about who's best 22. If you haven't seen already on my Twitter, I did like a screenshot from a Discord chat, which had kind of this full breakdown of who I saw as like really likely to play versus less likely to play. And you can kind of infer what I believe everyone's job security is based on that. And that's how I selected my team. Unfortunately, it just looks like a lot of the expensive rookies are the ones that we're going to be taking. So I might just chat on this a little bit, but if you just look at 140k plus, you've got four in the back line with Hinge, McCartan, Sin, and Kemp. Of these, like Hinge has done multiple shoulders. This is really scary to have, especially at 180k. McCartan obviously has had concussion problems that has forced him into retirement before, so it feels like he's just one knock away from retiring. Dean is only there until Roughhead returns, which we need to keep an eye on injury reports, but that's only week 4 or 5, so does he even make enough cash at 102k? Kemp looks like he may be playing in the forward line for Carlton, which I don't love. It's the same problem with Durden, by the way. And Sin of these is the only one that I'm quite optimistic at, but he might have the poorest job security of all of them. Who knows? But actually, I don't think so. I think we're going to get Sin. So, yeah, these are the fair options. In the midfield, we've got another 3 that are over 140k. So Horn, Francis, Dacos, and Stevens. Horn, Francis have been tossing over during the preseason, but he just looks the goods. And when you channel on that third quarter, he really differentiated himself from others. So I don't think he's going to be a phenomenal pick. Like, I don't think he's going to be like a Walsh or a Rowell who really popped from that high price tag. But I think he will, make that 150k and kind of end up being worthwhile. And given that we just don't have other rookies, I think we're just going to have to cop that on the chin. Dacos looks good in a rebuilding Collingwood side. They're going to give him lots of opportunity. So, yeah, quite optimistic about what his score could look like this year. And then Dylan Stevens, like, I've saw mixed reports. So he's playing like inside, outside, but he was a little bit softer on the inside, so maybe more suited to the outside game, which is a little bit scary on 170k price tag. Effectively, if they can't win their own ball, quite reliant on the team doing well, which he is in a good team, but then also receiving it in that team. I think like the other thing that was really hard to judge about him was the Greater Western Sydney versus Swans player like recordings, just terrible. Like him, Heaney, and I think Warner all have the same blonde hair. You just couldn't tell which one was which. Couldn't see the player numbers. Just rubbish viewing. So hopefully the Amy series or JLT or whatever it's currently called over the next week will give us some insight into where he's at. And on the bench, I've got 3 here. So McDonald, I think, has been impressing for the Hawks. I think Ward is also, by the way, quite likely to get a go. Just more expensive, 180k. I can kind of fit in one of him or Stevens at the moment, and it feels like Stevens might be a little bit of a better option. Ward's had some problems, which make me nervous about his 180k price tag. I believe he's also one of like the Vic draftees that haven't played a bunch of footy. So that like worries me a little bit. We saw last year they didn't score as well. I mean, that's a problem some of these other ones have as well, by the way, like Sin. And then Mead played all right for Port. Sam Pepper went off with a hamstring injury, which is probably one of the players that he's fighting with for a position in the best 22. I think he's probably more unlikely than likely he gets a game based on what I've seen and read so far, but I wouldn't rule it out. And then O'Driscoll, I feel like, is down the pecking order a little bit. Hasn't been overly impressive in the scratch match, although he did have a good preseason. And we still have Fife, Mundy, and Walters all to return to the side. So I'm just a little bit worried about what that means for his position and job security. So really, I've got 4 of these across the bottom here that I'm pretty confident will get a game. And Mead and O'Driscoll are kind of placeholders, praying that we get a 124k rookies or less to fill up these spots. In the rucks, I've got Hayes here. This actually should probably be Comben. So it looks like Lyset is going to return from the latest report I read. He's not going to be out for round 1. So that's probably means Comben of the two is maybe a little bit more likely to actually get a game in North's forward line. I don't expect him to score great, but he will make us some money, which is better than nothing. Maybe he can jag some games where he scores a couple of goals and gets a nice cash generation, even though his average is poor for the year. And then in the forward line, like this is really slim pickings again. So Hollands I've got out, which is the big omission, and like he's quite highly owned as well. I think if I look at ownership percentage, yeah, second highest owned forward. So he played in the seconds over the scratch matches and did pretty well from the reports I read. But this is quite concerning. Like people were thinking they didn't get played because he's being held out still because of that groin injury, and if they were doing load management, why wouldn't have they just played him in the firsts and then pulled him early, or just played him for the second half, which is what you saw a lot of other teams do. I think this is quite bad signal that he got played in the seconds, and maybe they are going to nurse him or wait a little bit longer for him to debut this year. He has only been on the list for 1 year and been injured for most of it. Only played a handful of games in the second, so like I'm worried. We need him. We need him, but I'm worried. So who do we have instead? So Rochelle from the Crows, someone that I was definitely not keen on. 184k for a small forward does not look good. But I think watching the Crows game on the weekend, we saw him play more up the ground, and obviously he got involved even though the Crows weren't playing particularly well, and that's really promising stuff. I think not only for what is his ceiling as that small forward, like can he make enough cash? But also like maybe as the year goes on, he gets more midfield time or more time up the ground at stoppages, even if he's not necessarily playing at CBAs, which could help his scoring. I think like the only problem with having him on field is he feels like a very high variance player. So we might have some weeks where we get like an 80 out of him and other weeks where we get a 30, and that's going to be really hard to try and like time and adjust. I mean, the game on the weekend where they got beat, you would imagine that someone in his position wouldn't score particularly well, but he still managed to put a decent score together. And then on the bench, we've got Durden, who's getting high raps out of Carlton. He's playing a small forward role, so not someone that I anticipate is going to score awfully well for us, but he does seem to have good job security kind of locked into that forward line at the moment, and I can't see who would come back and knock him out of that. I might be wrong, but he just seems like a high job security player at the moment. And then the last one's McGuinness, who I'm a little bit iffy on. He's had mixed reports, so a lot of it has been like he's been training well, but I've also seen some stuff around his kicking hasn't been particularly great, and he's had some practice or scratch match games where he looks quite good and others where he looks quite far off the pace. So I'm a little bit worried about, does he actually get a round one start? I mean, he's quite an inexperienced player if they're playing McDonald and Ward as well. Like, how many of these guys are they willing to carry? I know they're rebuilding, I know they're blooding youth, but I guess like you still have to find that balance between experienced players and younger players. And look, I mean, he's not debuting, but 3 debuting players is, of course, fine. But they do have lots of others to get through as well, like Long and Butler, for example, who they picked up this year. So that's kind of where the rookies are at. And of course, as we always talk about, rookies dictate structure. So they're the ones I've plugged in first and then figured out what are the premiums and mid prices I can carry that kind of work with this structure. So I'll go through them quickly. I think the big change in the forward line, the defense, is that I've lost Dawson. So he's come up with a calf complaint over the week or weekend. We thought he was originally being held out of that Crows game because of COVID. Either he had it or he was a close contact. And that may have been the case, but now a calf complaint has also popped up. The positives here is it doesn't seem to be like a strain or a tear. It was more like tightness. So it doesn't appear like an injury's occurred. But of course, anytime you have calf problems, this is like a big danger sign. And like, I'm quite upset about this because he is someone that I honestly could have seen being the number one defender for the year, and at 12%, 12% ownership was someone that would have been unique to my side. But yeah, that's just not going to be the case anymore. Like, I know a lot of people are keen on Short. He's the other one that you could go to as more like left field option, even though I think he's pretty safe at his price. I don't think you can get less than 98. But I've chosen Ridley, which I think is actually the more popular option amongst the Supercoach community more broadly, but less popular against the expert players, which is like an interesting position to be in. And this is always the hard part with ownership percent. I don't really care about ownership percent against the competition. I only want to know what it's against the top 1,000 coaches. And even then, I don't really consider it that much. It's just interesting to see if they're considering players I'm not. So I would imagine that amongst like top 1,000 super coaches, that Ridley's actually less popular than Short, but I could be wrong there. So why Ridley? What's really interesting is that he took very few kickouts on the scratch match game, which is a big warning sign. So this is a watch for the next game. But he was off for, I'd say, roughly half of the first quarter. And during that first quarter is when most of the kickouts were taken. In fact, in the third and fourth quarter, I don't think any kickouts were taken at all. Or maybe one, Ridley took one in the third and Redmond had two in the second. And then the rest of them were in the first quarter when he was basically off. He took one himself, something like that. So of the 8 kick-ins, he had 2 and he was going to take a third, but time expired. Those were kind of stats. So these are low kick-in numbers for him where he looked at 50% to 70% last season. And obviously, anytime you've got a defender that's losing kickouts, this is a bit of a worry. But I still think there's lots of positives here that we saw, which is he still managed a 104 with only 2 kickouts. So taking those intercept marks. The talk around Essendon in the preseason was Kelly's coming in to free him up to be able to roam, do more of that intercepting, play up the ground more, have more impact on the game. And that's what we saw, which is, I think, a pleasant sign. And I guess it's an important blanket statement. I'm not judging premiums or picking them based on their scores. I'm looking at role and effort and how they look, how they spread. We'll talk about Rao in a minute, even though I don't have him. He's another example of this, to evaluate whether or not I think they're good picks. And so Ridley getting that score of, I think it was like a 104, playing kind of 3.5 quarters and missing kick-outs and the first quarter where a lot of the scaling does come from generally. Super positive signs, I think, that he can take it to the next level. He's also one of those players that hired a speed coach over the offseason to improve his athleticism, which is maybe one of the areas of his game he could improve. And he's still young. I think he's 23, 24. He hasn't even played 50 games yet. He's kind of, around that 70 game mark is where you really see massive amounts of improvement. So I think he is a player that could go to another level this year. There's still other drawbacks. Redmond can take more kick-ins. Heppel scored a lot down back. You've got McGrath down there now as well, who could not only demand kick-ins, but be another exit from defense. And you've got Hind as well, who was really good rebounding last year. So look, it's not without its downsides, especially when you look at someone with Short who is competing against either Ralph Smith or Rioli, who would be coming down to halfback for their first time this year. But I don't know, maybe this is Essendon homer in me, but I do see upside in Ridley, but I'm not locked in on this pick. I would have preferred for it to be Dawson. Lloyd and Whitfield haven't moved from my side. I'm not going to talk about them too much, other than to say Lloyd's performance was a little bit worrying on the weekend. Once again, that match was really hard to watch. So I'm going to be intently watching him this weekend to kind of see what his role is down back, how it interplays with guys like Campbell, what's happening with kick-ins, who's taking it out of defense. I think that was the worry with Campbell last year, was that he is a good kick and he's someone that could potentially take some of that from Lloyd. So yeah, just an eye on that. Like maybe we don't need him and I can downgrade him somewhere else. And then Whitfield at 500k, I just think he's a no-brainer. I'm pretty sure he scored well on the weekend, but to be honest, he could have scored a 70 and he'd still be in my side. Like, as long as he looks healthy and finds a go, then I'm absolutely sold on that pick. I think the big call-outs from the weekend were Sicily, Crisp, Stewart. Miller didn't play. He's going to play this week. Coleman didn't play. He's going to play this week, which is a little bit annoying. And then Short and Hewitt. So there are actually lots of defenders that scored really well. And I think it's important not to get sucked into the trap because generally these preseason games are looser, they're less contested, and it's much easier for these rebounding halfback defender types to score really large scores. We saw it last year with Short. I mean, he popped like a 170 or something in the preseason and it just doesn't carry over to real games. So when you see like Stewart and him, and even to a lesser extent Ridley, racking up intercept marks, rebounding points, etc., it's not really reflective of how actual games are going to go. I guess like the pleasing signs were for Sicily and Stewart, both obviously coming with injury clouds. Seeing Sicily kind of get back to his best or look near it does bring him more into consideration. He's someone that I was pretty much off my list altogether. I wouldn't say he's completely off it. Like small consideration, I guess like the extra money he brings is nice, but I don't need it to go to 12 primos in this structure, which means like maybe I avoid him for now unless I need another mid-pricer. Crisp got that mid-time that was talking about. I just don't think that matters that much for his scoring. Like, I think he's kind of priced at his max which is, 22 games to 105 is great. There's nothing wrong with that. I just rather have some upside picks. And then, Short obviously did really well. So, I think he's a fine pick as well. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens when Rioli and Ralph Smith and him are all playing in the same side, which should be this weekend. In the midfield, I think the McRae, Steele, and Neal hasn't changed, so I won't talk to them. The two changes here are Berry and Touk Miller. So Berry's kind of replaced a rookie. I freed up cash to make that happen, mainly because we don't have the mid rookies available, and Berry just looked phenomenal. I mean, I know he comes with big injury risk, but honestly, he was playing an amazing inside-outside game, was able to go forward and look dangerous, and I just don't see how you can't pick him given that effort. So once again, it's not about the score. It's about how he looked. Did he look good? What role was he playing? How important did he seem in that side of structure? And he ticks the boxes on all those things. So I think he's someone that you have to have for now. We'll obviously see how this week goes. But yeah, quite bullish on him. And to be honest, I was already a Rayner hater, but you won't be surprised to hear me say, I don't know how you could pick someone like a Rayner over Berry in your side. I just don't get it. And then Touk Miller added in, he was effortless. He was absolutely effortless. But I think the big concern here is that I thought Sam Mitchell was talking a bit of fluff, or whoever it was, maybe it was the mids coach, a bit like what we saw with Neal and some of these other types where they're talking about they're going to play more forward, they're going to play more wing, we're going to have lots of guys rotating through there. And you're like, yeah, okay, sure. That's totally going to happen. And then, of course, the premium, your best players end up just playing all the midfield rotations. And so we saw that with Neal. Bont played still, I think he played every CBA in the first, and then before resting in the second, and then being managed. But Titch is someone that I'm actually somewhat concerned about now that they will phase him and Miller out. Obviously, the trade rumors last year, and that Hawk side is so bad at the moment. I can see them just throwing in the towel and going full rebuild from early on. They obviously got lots of good youth to build around for the future, but they are a year or two at least off being competitive, I would say. And that's quite worrying. Maybe it was just a scratch match. I'm reading too much into this, but yeah, I'm a little bit worried that they genuinely will spend, put Titch at half forward more, which does limit the value that he offered at his price, where someone like Touk does seem safer from that perspective of he just effortlessly ran and racked up 30 touches on the weekend. I think I was a little bit worried about how the injuries, to Bose, to King, to I think Lukosius now as well, was going to affect someone like Touk, and whether Gold Coast maybe not winning more games this year limited his upside. But I think I'm probably happy to pay for what I get. I would have loved Walsh at this price, but obviously injured, not going near him. The only other one that comes into consideration for me is Parrish, and it's not because he scored well, it is because he basically had every CBA, which was really interesting. A lot of the talk with Essendon, and I've said it myself, is how are they going to do the CBAs, how are they going to do the centre rotations, and Caldwell didn't get any, so he goes off your list. Shield, Merritt, and Parrish basically took all of them. McGrath wasn't in there at all. I think he had maybe one. Langford had a couple towards the back end. A couple of guys rotated basically when other players were resting type thing. But yeah, I mean, it looks like they're actually going to treat him as the number one midfielder this year, and I think he can go to another level. Once again, he's at that age profile. He was drafted behind Oliver, so he's that kind of pedigree as a inside mid that can be damaging on the outside, and we saw that last year. So with tagging being less prevalent, I know people worry about that. I just don't see it as big of an issue. It's also something he will have been working on over the preseason. So yeah, I think Parrish would be the cheaper option I'm probably most interested in. I would really love to go Brayshaw and back him, but I think car fishes last year, low time on ground just means I can't. But yeah, my two preferred options in Titch and Walsh off the table. The other option with this structure, and I'm probably not going to shot now because it's actually a bit hard to fiddle around and remember how I do this stuff, but would be to just go 3 premium mids and download Touk Miller to Rao. Interestingly, I think there's 3 really good options here in Lipinski, Rao, and Shield. I would still have Rao number 1 because I've been his big fanboy, been the big respecter on the preseason, but he looked pretty good on the weekend. He looked obviously still. I feel like there's still another gear for him to go, but he's running. I mean, the thing that we're looking for was, is Rao spreading? Is he running from contest to contest? Is he going to get outside ball, or is he just going to be that clearance player And I think we saw indications that he is getting back to that running, that outside play. I saw multiple plays where he was keeping up with Wines, who's not the fastest by any means, but he was spreading defensively and offensively. And he's still able to have massive points per touch. He had, I don't know, it was like 120 Supercoach and he had 18 disposals, which is nuts. He's got incredibly high tackling. So I could see him somewhere averaging between like 5 and 8 tackles a game this year. And if you don't believe me, go look up some of his past games. Even when he's come back off the PCL and shoulder last year, he was still tackling a ton. So I think he's kind of got like that safe floor. It's just his upside is going to be prevented by whether or not he gets that spread on the outside, whether he's going to be getting some of that cheap, easy ball, some of those marks on the outside, and whether he can hit the scoreboard again. So yeah, like I really like Rao, but I think Lipinski also looked great. I think he led the CBAs, and Shield was Essendon's third clearance player. At his best, he was a low 100s midfield as well. And so all of these kind of become interesting options competing with each other at that, 330 to 360 price range, I think they're all at. So I could see myself removing like someone like a Took to get one of them in, or even if we don't get the midfield rookies, adding Raul in and taking someone like Stevens off the field. I could see myself doing that and like downgrading someone else. Maybe I free up money with like Lloyd, taking Lloyd to like a Hewitt or a Sicily or something, and then getting round to my midfield on top of this, which I could, see myself doing. I mean, it's a little bit sketchy having 2 Gold Coast players in there, but I mean, I'm already doing 2 lines. Why not just load up on Queensland? Oh, that's a little bit worrying given how they've treated COVID restrictions now, I think about it. But yeah, I really liked his game. Darcy and Grundy. We didn't get to see Darcy play, right? He's still recovering off his fractured hand, and Meek played well and he rucked pretty well, which is the concern with Darcy. Like, does Meek affect him if they're playing together? Gorn obviously looked good, and I could actually see more people. I mean, I'm sure Gorn's probably more popular anyway, just because this has been the golden combo for the last 3 or 4 years. I could see more people getting off Darcy and going to Gorn and locking in this little safer combo rather than going for someone like Darcy, who's already had 3 concerns over the preseason. None of them have been major, but they all are like, man, this is exactly the problem last year. He had like 6 or 7 games interrupted by injury in some form. He didn't miss games, but he like had low time on ground, or he was like playing through something. And so, yeah, he's at that point where you can see the upside, but you can also see the downside here as well in this pick. But yeah, haven't moved these for now. I just think that you're not getting a 120 from Gorn. You're getting a 115 to 110. Where with Darcy, if he plays and he's healthy, you're getting between like a 115 and 125. So I just think it comes down to, can I trust Darcy's body to go with that pick, or do I go the safer option with Gorn and like lose a bit of value, lose a bit of price on the pick? But yeah, I mean, like, people are going to talk up Bruce and talk about how good he played in the 2 or 3 quarters he played at. He came on like Q4. He was playing against the Swans second. I'm not even sure if they had a recognised ruck at that point, because Naismith's injured. Witts would have come off. I honestly don't know. And like Laddams, they wouldn't have played a solid ruck against him. So I'm sure he looked good rucking against like a VFL quality ruckman. And he's always looked good. But the more concerning thing is that he wasn't first preference. I know Briggs has had, I think, some like skull damage, like a fracture or something. But I haven't heard if he's in doubt for round 1, which like can bring Bruce into consideration. But yeah, I mean, this just doesn't seem like a great pick. I think we're headed down the path that we saw last year, where Flynn, Briggs, and Bruce all get used and rotated through that ruck in some form or another. Like, basically, Bruce kind of comes in for mummy. So even if he's the lead ruck of the 3, he's going to get rested maybe like every 2 or 3 games to make sure he's fit and capable. It sounds weird, but I think they're going to go with that approach because they don't want to stop developing Flynn and Briggs, who've showed a lot. But I could also see them, especially in a year where they could contend, wanting to play their best in Bruce, which is what we saw with Mummy last year. Witts, I actually don't know anything about. Draper didn't play particularly well, but I don't think these are realistic picks. Marshall is like somewhat interesting just because Ryder is potentially missing round 1, and who knows how much longer. I think he's been dealing with Achilles issues. So, I mean, if Marshall was the only ruck and Ryder was ruled out for the year for whatever reason, he becomes really in consideration. But yeah, just not, I don't think a realistic one. Nick Nat scores primarily off hit-outs to advantage, and West Coast doesn't have a midfield anymore. So I think this is a bit of a risky pick. Rob and Omac, who rucked against each other, both looked pretty average. I mean, I know you kind of don't pick off preseason form, but if you were considering a cheaper option, I'd keep an eye on them this weekend. So yeah, I still think it's going to be set and forget. It's just which two of Grundy gone and Darcy you pick. And then finishing off with the forward lines, this forward line for me hasn't really moved much apart from getting Kerno out and Ralph Smith in. So Kerno scored lower than what I would expected and looked worse than what I expected because Mackay wasn't playing. So he had to park at full forward, deep forward, rather than roaming up the ground, which is what you'd expect from him. The other concerning part is that he had that knee knock, which the club has said is nothing. I don't think they even got a scan, but given his like history of knee problems, that's like a little bit surprising that they didn't go and do something with that. Yeah, so at the moment, like this is Ralph Smith just because he's playing that halfback role, and I think if he still gets it over Rioli, he's a really interesting option. But I do have money for this to be like Kerno, or it could be Brody, who have been like calling Paddy Dow 2.0, and he's definitely like got a hype score in the preseason like Paddy Dow. So I don't know, I'm gonna have to watch him a little bit more closer this weekend. But yeah, I mean, he's also been someone that has like played well without Fife, Mundy, Walters. Like, is his role as good when they're all back? This seems like a trap to me. And so I'm either looking at Ralph Smith, maybe Kerno, maybe another rookie if they pop up, or finding some way to get him to like Coleman if Coleman looks really good. Cogs was like a lock all preseason and like he looked great. So yep, that's easy as. Dunkley, Heaney, and Butters all got the mid-time that we were looking for. They all got the CBAs, and that's all I care about. The scores I think were good too, but it's really not the primary thing that we were looking at. The other thing with Heaney was Papley's now gone down for I think up to 6 weeks to start the season. So I guess it's a little bit like the Taranto Toby Green situation, which is could you see Heaney spend more time forward as a result of that injury? And I hope not. I guess we'll get a feel for it this weekend to see what happens. They have other small forwards now that they can play in that spot. I know Heaney's still their best small forward, but they've really pushed hard for him to go into the midfield, so I'm hoping that injuries don't derail that. Other forwards, I guess, worth talking about is Dusty looked good, looked like he was playing that mid-time. I can see why people would want to go here. I just like some of these other options better. Thomas was probably the one that, Taranto, he like went crazy and had lots of mid-time. So who knows what's going on there? That's another watch. Like, is he actually getting that mid-time? Because maybe he does come back into consideration. Just he's got good injury history. Duncan was already off the list. Treloar scored well, I believe. He was actually probably nearly best on for the Dogs for the time that he played. But yeah, the injury history means he's a no-go. Degoe obviously didn't play with the broken rib. Bailey looked phenomenal, but I mean, the Lions decimated. So I think everyone scored high and looked pretty good. It's a little bit hard to take out of that. And then Thomas, I think, probably didn't do as well as maybe some of the other options. He still looked all right, but he was carrying that midfield a lot. They're missing a lot of their really good players. And I don't know. He just doesn't seem like as good an option as the others to me at the moment. So yeah, I think that's the quick overview of kind of my team, the considerations, the rookies, the structure, where it's at. My structure at the moment is 12 primos with, I guess, 3 mid-prices, but it's a bit weird to call Ralph Smith the mid-pricer because like Horn Francis, who's a rookie, is more expensive than him, obviously. So maybe you just say it's like 2 real mid-prices in Berry and Cogs. Yeah, I think the big thing for me that'll end up shifting this is what happens with the rookies. Do we get cheaper options that are good as well that frees up money for me? Because I could imagine if I can get rid of a couple of these 140, 150k rookies I don't particularly like, then Ralph Smith becomes Coleman, and that side probably becomes a lot more comfortable. Or it could even become someone like a Rao, which I'm quite interested in at the moment as well. But yeah, I'm trying to avoid going to something like 11 primos or like 11 primos plus like a sketchy option like a Sicily or something like that, which I know people are considering a primo. It's just not there for me mentally at the moment. Oh, and just to sign off, like I'll just laugh at this camera in a pic one more time. 30%. Oh, you can't see it. Where is it? 30%. Seriously. I don't know. I've been saying no to this all preseason. I hope you guys are starting to realize that there's a big difference between on the track, no pressure, and actually playing an AFL game. And like, I just don't think he is an accumulator. Not saying he's a bad player. I just don't think he's an accumulator, which is going to hurt his SuperCoach scoring. But hey, he may prove me wrong this week, so we'll see what happens. And like, I'm not ruling out any possibilities, but yeah, I just doubt, big doubt. All right, so yeah, let me know below kind of what plays you're tossing up between, what you're thinking about, and also whether like what's kind of surprised you about this team. As I said at the stop, I don't love this team. I think it's good. I think I'm happy enough with the structure and the rookies. I mean, I've overpaid for the rookies, but I think they're the best rookies we have info on at the moment. But yeah, like let me know what you do or don't like about the team. I'm curious to see what you think and how it compares to, I guess, some of the other teams that you've seen. But anyway, that's it for me. There's some other content coming this week. I did a draft video with the Herald Sun team, which was pretty fun. A lot of it is me like being rude, just laughing at like other picks or myself or my own dumb jokes, which I was muted for most of it. So like, yeah. But yeah, that was lots of fun and like actually great to meet some of the other Supercoach community people that I've known for a long, well, I've known of for a long time, but I've never really spoken to or done anything with. So that was like quite cool to. It was almost like speed dating, Supercoach speed dating. Oh, that sounds weird. But yeah, that'll be coming out soon, I think, on the Supercoach channel, which I'll probably link to on my Twitter, and I might even upload my own team if that is interesting in the future. But yeah, I've waffled on for more than enough, so I am going to log off now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.